Hey folks, Rich here, South Florida Beekeeping with Rich. Not too long ago, we were doing some work at one of the apiaries, and I was saying something to a new beekeeper, and Gus looked at me and went, "Have you ever done a video on that?" I'm like, "Well, not exactly. I've mentioned all the things I was just saying at different points, but have you ever done a video on it?" It's like, "No." "Well, you need to do a video on that." I was like, "All right, so here we go. I'm going to do a video on this." This is for you new beekeepers out there, for you folks who are still in the process of buying your equipment, okay? Because one of these things is not like the other way too often. Now, 10 frame hives in the United States are set in stone. The numbers are sacred. The dimensions are always going to be the same across the board. But the dimensions for a standard Langstroth hive are not the same exactly in Australia or England, and they are most definitely not the same in China, which is what this video is really all about. I just want to caution everybody, if you're going to buy stuff from China, it can be a real problem. You need to go with buyer beware. You need to know what the dimensions of a hive are and how this works. And I'll drop back and I'll explain, like, 10 frame hives are set in stone. 8 frame hives were not set in stone for quite a while. At this point, everybody pretty much agrees that the width of an 8 frame hive is 14 inches. But still, if you're buying from South Florida Bee Supply, they're still making 8 frame hives at 13 3/4 inches. Okay? And that gives enough room inside for 8 frames, but it doesn't give a whole lot of wiggle room. 14 inches gives you another 3/4 of an inch, or rather, sorry, half an inch to work with. Or no, 1/4 inch, but 1/4 inch may not sound like much, but when you're trying to move frames to one side or the other, that 1/4 inch is wonderful, because that helps you take up the space that propolis will fill on the shoulders of the frames and such. So for the most part, if you want to start off with your equipment from South Florida Bee Supply, that's terrific. Just keep that equipment as your brood boxes. And when you start ordering equipment from Dedant or Man Lake or Better Bee or Miller's Bee Supply or Western Bee or anywhere else, and they're going to sell you 14-inch stuff, put the 14-inch stuff above the 13 3/4 inch stuff. Because if you put the 13 3/4 inch on top of a 14 inch, then you're going to have a bead of moisture anytime it rains that's going to sit a lot longer, and there's going to be a lot more penetration and a lot more rot. Your boxes aren't going to last as long unless you put the bigger boxes above the slightly smaller ones. And that's fine. Brood boxes, if we were all doing this the way we really should, we'd all be shaving a little bit off of our frames and making the frames in our brood boxes slightly smaller anyway, because bees actually like that better for producing brood. Just make sure that you know which ones of your boxes are from South Florida Bee Supply and which ones are from most of the major manufacturers. Or just start with the major manufacturers and go from there. But don't start with China, okay? Because here come the numbers. I'll be looking up and down here, so just forgive me for that. 19 inches is the width of the top bar of a standard frame. 19 inches, okay? Now, if you put 19 inches into a calculator, it's going to come up as 482.6 millimeters. Hey, Rich, why are you going to millimeters? Because one of these things is not like the other. The only thing that is really consistent is the measurement. So a standard one is 19 inches, okay? But that's 482.6 in reality. And yet you will see even companies that say, 19-inch frame, that's 480, that's 484. It's actually 482. So it gets confusing right at the get-go, okay? And there are Chinese companies that will sell you a standard box, and it is perfectly standard, okay? And you would think, okay, it takes 19-inch frames. But what you will see then is these boxes are sold without frames. We recommend that you use 17.7-inch frames.
Where do you get those?
You get those when you buy a 19-inch frame. 17.7, okay?
Oh, they're measuring a different part of the
They're
frame.
measuring a different part of the frame. It's just like when you're trying to compare things in the stores, and this one is doing it this way and this one is doing it that way, and they're doing their best to keep you confused so that you can't compare apples to apples and oranges to oranges. So you will find Chinese frames that will say they're 19 inches, and you will find Chinese frames that are based on 17.7 inches. Now, let's get back to that 19 inches, because vertical queen excluders, okay, I've bought vertical queen excluders from there, and their frames aren't the 480 to 484, they're 488. They don't fit any American box. If you buy a lot, there's a lot of really cool stuff that they make in China that they will sell you here, but you have to adapt it. Now, is that them being stupid? No, it just means that America is not their only market. Somebody contracted with them to make vertical queen excluders from a different market, and they use a slightly larger measurement for their boxes. Either it's a different measurement for a Langstroth box, or it could be a British National Standard or something, okay? But they're not exactly the same, but they're trimmable. And there's no American company that you're going to get a vertical queen excluder from. You're going to be building your own stuff instead of something you can just drop in and pull out.
But you have to trim the edges.
But you have to trim the edges. And I've shown you how to do that in past videos. The way I do, yes, I have, dear. The way I do it is I mix some 2-part epoxy along with some sawdust. I fill the end of the lugs, because the lugs are always longer. I fill the end of the lugs with this. I let it sit overnight, and I come back the next morning, and I put it on the chop saw, and I very carefully trim off 1/8 of an inch on either side, and boom, you now have a queen excluder that will fit into a standard deep box. But the numbers are all over the place. Feeder shims, 490 centimeters. You have to trim way back to get them to the 484 or 480 or 482, whatever you want to call it, to basically the 19 inches. Just keep in mind that if you buy things from China, they make a lot of cool stuff you can't get in the United States, but it's not always to our dimensions. Okay, and this is what I was actually that started with me talking about the difference between some South Florida bee supply and some standard boxes, because I could see them on this guy's hive, and he was like, I wonder why these things aren't the same. And I was just explaining it to him. Well, obviously you got these here and you got those there. You want to learn a whole lot about this, you can go to Thorne, Thorne, Thorne Bee Supply in England, because unlike the United States, they still have a whole lot of different frame sizes available, because over there you had basically the British Beekeepers Association. That was one thing, and they put out the national magazine, and then you had manufacturers who did things, and they were separate branches, as it were. In the United States, what happened, we're going to get a little bit of conspiracy theory here. In the United States, AI Root Company is the Dot Beekeeping. AI Root Company is also Gleanings in Bee Culture once upon a time, and now just Bee Culture magazine. The largest producer of beekeeping equipment, the largest disseminator of beekeeping information, were all in one place. And so, unlike this catalog, which is a reproduction of their 1883 catalog, and that's their 40th edition, in here you will see all these different frame sizes. And basically the simplicity form is the simplicity frame. It was what we now use in Langstroth hives. Langstroth frame, everybody, well, this is a Langstroth frame. No, this is a Hoffman frame. Hoffman was the guy who came up with the idea of a narrower centerpiece and wider shoulders so that you had a self-spacing frame that didn't taper down. This is a Hoffman frame. The original frame that was used by Langstroth looked like this. As you can see, top bar 1 3/8, the side bars 1 3/8. I'm sorry, not 1 3/8. Actually, they were 1 1/4. And what you did was you put a staple on either side here to keep them spaced. Whether it was at different times, it was a nail, a staple, little piece of wood, whatever, but or you simply space them by eye, or you put little nails in the groove on your box to line them up with. But to start with, this had not been figured out. A guy designed these, started making them. His neighbor called AI Root Company, wrote them, and I should say, wrote them, and said, you need to come see this guy's frames. And they came out, they saw it, they bought the patent for it. Basically, they bought the right to make them, and boom, that's when we started getting the Hoffman frames. All right. Now in England, they say that a guy named Hoffman on the continent made them, but that's not the story I hear from here. But regardless, the Hoffman frame is what we use in the Langstroth hive. The Langstroth frame, the way of the dodo bird. Okay, they're not used anymore. All this paperwork you see in front of me is all about the different sizes. The Vivor boxes, which are a Chinese company, they're pretty much standard. They're pretty good. Some of the other Chinese boxes, they're kind of all over the place. So if you're buying something off of Amazon, do your due diligence and try to figure out whether this is something that came from China or not.
Don't they give the dimensions?
Sometimes.
You usually give them in centimeters, though.
Centimeters converts to millimeters by times 10, and that's all it takes. So know your numbers. This is the thing. When you start looking and shopping around for this stuff, there's some great deals out there in buying Chinese equipment. I was online for an hour this morning preparing for this video, and I saw a company that is going to give you 2 10-frame deeps and 2 10-frame mediums wax dipped, and the dimensions are correct. Okay, I mean, wax dipped. All right. So yeah, it's there are some deals to be had, but just beware that all deals are not equal.
Why do you have the Building Beehives for Dummies book out?
Well, I had the Building Beehives for Dummies book out just to show, in case I needed to, that there was a time when 8-frame hives were being made at 13 3/4. And like I say, some companies are still, most of them have decided on 14 inches. When this manual, or rather when this catalog came out in the 1800s, beehives were not measured by their exterior dimensions because there was no standardization of lumber. If you bought beehives from this company, in every case, what they told you was the interior dimension of the box. Okay? For an 8-frame box has a 12.5-inch interior dimension. It didn't matter what the outside was. Some standardization started coming in around just immediately prior to and mostly during World War I, because the government started making huge contracts, buying huge amounts of materials, and they wanted standardization. And between World War I and World War II, more standardization came in, and by the time we got to World War II, everything was pretty much standard. If you wanted anything that wasn't, you needed to go straight to the sawmill and, you know, have it custom cut for you. So yes, now if you use the exterior dimension, you can minus 1.5 inches from it and you can know what the interior dimension is. But if you read this and you're reading on the dimensions, then it's always going to be the interior dimension of the box, because it could be a 1-inch thick box, could be 1.25 inches, whatever. It's just whatever they saw the stuff out at. But the interior dimensions were what was important.
And then here, those 2 items over there.
Okay, so this is the fun of it. Now again, the Chinese have a lot of cool things. Not that they're all necessarily original. We were making queen catchers / drone catchers like this. I was reading about them in magazines from the 1890s. So this really doesn't matter. This just attaches onto here. A lot, if you do buy boxes, if you buy whole setups from China, make sure that the bottom board is of the solid bottom board is of the standard type that will have 3/4 inches on one side and 3/8 inches on the other side. Because the Chinese, if you're buying their screened bottom boards and such, you're going to find that a lot of times they use a 3/8 inch opening for the bees. So you're going to have your beehive completely open. It's not going to be completely open and be 12.5 by 3/4. It's going to be 12.5 by 3/8. Or more to the point, what their version, let me find that number here real quick. Yeah. So 0.75 inches, that is 3/4 inches, is standard on our stuff. Well, 2 centimeters is 0.79 inches, kind of a loose fit. Okay. But they also do 3/8 of an inch. Well, it's like 1 centimeter. And again, it's not true to ours.
But I don't understand what that thing in your hand is.
Okay, you will in a second. This piece attaches to a bar that that a Chinese hive would have, like a reducer bar.
Okay.
And it would screw onto it, and it would fit directly into their boxes.
So it goes on the front of the hive.
So it goes on the front of the hive, so it's dangles down here.
Entrance.
Well, what it is. This video isn't about this. This video is about what I had to do to modify it.
I know, but you stuck it on the table, so I want to know what it is.
With this, everything is sealed off. Bees come and go through here, and they can actually come and go through any of this. What can't come and go through any of this is drones or queens.
Oh.
So if you think your hive's about to swarm, you can attach this in the front, and when the swarm starts emerging and is all up here in the air,
the queen can't get out.
The queen can't get out, and she hopefully is trapped in here.
Unless she's a virgin.
And well, yeah, unless she's a virgin, but you're not looking for a virgin queen to swarm. If you think your hive's about to swarm, it's because your old queen's getting ready to leave. Right. Now, whether she got skinny down enough to get through here or not, well, that's anybody's guess. I mean, you can only do what you can do.
Right.
Unless you're going to do it like the Chinese or like the German steppe beekeepers, and you put a fine mesh cloth that goes 20 feet out,
like
and you stand at the end of it like a big windsock.
Yeah.
And you stand there and you catch the whole swarm in the windsock. You know, you do what you can there.
So have you actually tried using that?
I have.
Okay.
It actually does work. It'll trap all the drones in the world. But the problem is that for it to really work with a queen, you'd have to be kind of standing out there waiting for the whole thing to happen.
Right.
And I never am. So this was kind of useless. But to make this work, I had to make an adapter for a standard 3/4 inch board, so I could slip it in there and fit it in.
Ah.
So that was just
the wrong dimension.
That was just to show that this dimension is made up for the 1 centimeter. It's not even made up for the 3/8. This is made up for 1 centimeter. This is something they use a lot because they have people out there watching for the swarm to emerge, and they're catching the queen, and they're doing all that. It's a cool unit. I just don't find it useful for me, so I never did a video on it. But it is a good example of sometimes you have to adapt things. Sometimes you have to trim down feeders of different sorts. I've had feeders that had as much as 490 centimeters. Okay, whereas your standard is 480 to 484. in that range you can do things, but I've had them at 490, where I had to take a good quarter of an inch off either side in order to make them fit.
Did you mean to say centimeters or did you mean to say millimeters?
Millimeters.
Okay.
I meant to say millimeters.
Okay.
Oh, I'm conspiracy. Like I said, go back to the beginning of this. So you had the primary company that was making the magazine that most beekeepers read, and they were manufacturing the equipment. And what they kept doing was they had the copyright for Langstroth's book, okay, and they had the copyrights or the manufacturing rights to make his hives. And so what they kept doing was pushing people to Langstroth equipment. They kept bad mouthing anybody else's designs. And just like today, cancel culture, all you have to do, somebody can come up with a great idea, but if it doesn't get reported on, then nobody knows about it. And back then, a magazine that came out was about the only way you learned about anything. So
control the press and you control the message.
You control the message, and little by little by little, they just kept dropping anything that wasn't Langstroth equipment.
Mm-hmm.
Now, was this terrible? No, in a sense, it wasn't, because it has given us a whole lot of uniformity, a whole lot of confidence. But the thing is, the Langstroth system that they came up with was really designed for the commercial beekeeper. And we are going back to the idea now, people are realizing, even as Langstroth did, because here's a piece of information that you never heard out of Gleanings and Bee Culture magazine. Langstroth himself was still alive at the time, and he was doing his research, and he had come to the conclusion that his original design was not the best for the bees. And he went to AI Root and said, we really need to restructure and retool everything, because I've come to the conclusion that the best hive would be 14 by 14. And they basically said, go sit down, have a coffee. We're not changing anything. We're committed to this course of action. Okay? Whereas if you go to Britain, the British standard has 14-inch by 12-inch deep frames. And along with many others. But it's just like up until literally after I began beekeeping, when I started beekeeping, you could still buy what is called a jumbo frame, which was basically an 11-inch deep standard Hoffman frame. You know, now we have deeps, mediums, and shallows, but there used to have an extra deep, a jumbo frame that was 11 inches instead of 9 inches. Okay, and Miller Bee Supply was still making them when I started beekeeping, but about 2 years after I started beekeeping, they were dropped from the catalogs as well, because everybody was going to more standardized and more standardized and more standardized. But just to throw it in there, of course, my hero is O.O. Poppleton, who used a long type hive, okay, one story, and he had lots of experience with Langstroth hives, and he, of course, had tried the experiments and had come to the conclusion that the Hoffman type frame with the shoulders and the spacing was simply not a very good way to do the long bar hive. And he didn't write much about it. He just did it. He did some experiments. They didn't work out. He went back to doing things the way he'd always done it, which was with the American frame, which was the middle one right there. Okay, and we need more people to do more experimenting. We need people to do something other than come up with new ways to use than using just the standard Hoffman frame.
Which is what you're doing.
Which is what I'm doing. I've been working with the Poppleton hive, and I'm so convinced of its efficacy that I am going to build some more of them, and I'm going to build the frames that go in them. and I'm going to transfer most of my beekeeping over to that type.
Oh, that'll be an
this
interesting
point.
video
That'll be a lot of interesting videos.
because that'll be cut. You can't just move the frames. You'll have to cut the comb out, transfer it.
No, I'll probably just get rid of those hives by moving them on to somebody else, and I will catch swarms next spring, and I will put them in fresh.
Oh, well, there's another thought.
Yeah. That's it for now, though. See you guys later.